Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Bhavya Nathani, and my topic for today is preoperative echocardiography, what an anesthetist should know. Now, this is a very large topic. It is actually a 2-day workshop, but I have been asked to summarize it in 20 minutes. My goal will be to give you a bird's eye view of the entire topic. So, an echocardiography is a procedure which is safe, non-invasive, reproducible, cost-effective, and easy to perform. Our learning objectives are that you should be able to interpret findings from an echocardiographic study in a systematic manner, to be able to appreciate relative clinical values of various echo findings in different clinical scenarios, and recognize those that will impact your clinical decision making, and then integrate all these with the findings of clinical examination and investigations, and then apply them in patient care. So the current guidelines state when should you perform an echo. Suppose you're sitting in a PSC clinic and a patient comes to you, so you should know exactly whether or not you have to order an echo for this patient. So according to the 2014 American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association guidelines, it is recommended if the patient has a clinically suspected moderate or greater degree of valvular stenosis or regurgitation, no prior echocardiography within 1 year, or a significant change in clinical status or physical examination, for example, a new murmur or a new onset of dyspnea since it's his or her last evaluation. It is reasonable for patients with dyspnea of unknown origin to get LV function evaluated, with heart failure, with worsening dyspnea, or any change in clinical status. Reassessment in clinically stable patients with previously documented dysfunction may be considered if there has been no assessment within 1 year. So it may be done if, but you can judge whether you need it or not. And routinely, it is definitely not recommended. I will talk about the basic views of echocardiography, which are the suprasternal view, the parasternal long axis and the short axis views, the apical view, and the subcostal view. Now, the modalities of echocardiography are the two-dimensional echo, which we normally do, a beautiful modality called the M-mode echo, which I will subsequently describe, and in Doppler echo, you have the continuous and the pulsed wave Doppler and the color flow Doppler. So in M-mode echocardiography, remember that the ultrasound wave is transmitted and received only along one scan line. You apply the cursor to the 2D image, align it perpendicular to the structure being studied. Here, perpendicular, in Doppler, you align it parallel. Then you have two axes in a continuous tracing. The x-axis has time and the y-axis gives you the distance between the moving structure and the transducer. So it's excellent sensitivity for studying motion of moving cardiac structures. And because there is a simultaneous ECG recording, you can have an accurate timing of cardiac events. So this is a simplified view of the M mode. This is a normal M mode. You can see the mitral valve. This is the diastole and this is the systole. Here you can see that there is prolapse of the both leaflets of the mitral valve and systole. So this is how we can diagnose lesions with the M mode. In the aortic valve, this is a thickened calcified aortic valve, an M mode. Here you have a normal M mode where you can have a coronary cusp. You can see the anterior aortic root, the non-coronary cusps, and the left atrium over here. Here you have premature opening, that is the opening of the atrial valve before the onset of the QRS complex. So it is correlating with the ECG, and this is seen in elevated left ventricular and diastolic pressure. And here you have premature closure before the onset of the T wave, and this is seen in idiopathic hypertrophic subaortic stenosis. Now, there are two modalities in Doppler, a pulsed wave and a continuous wave. A pulsed wave Doppler transmits ultrasound and pulses and waits. It receives the returning ultrasound. It uses one transducer to send and receive the signals. There is a time delay because of this. This limits the sampling rate and it cannot detect high velocities over 2 meters per second. There is reversal of flow or LESE. It has a better spectral tracing than continuous wave Doppler, so it is used to localize velocity signals and abnormal flow patterns. The EA ratio, which I will explain, the mitral valve inflow signal in left ventricular diastolic dysfunction, and the aortic valve outflow signal in stroke volume and cardiac output. The continuous wave Doppler uses two transducers, and they continuously transmit and receive signals, so it cannot determine the depth from which a signal has originated, but the direction it can. And the advantage is there is no limit on the maximum velocity. So here you can see the continuous wave Doppler, and below that is the pulsed wave Doppler. And here the continuous wave Doppler mode records all Doppler pulses in a unidimensional beam. This is the color flow Doppler. It's a visual display of the blood flow in the heart. It can give you both anatomical as well as functional information. We all know blue means away and red means towards. Remember that the low velocities are dull and dark and the high velocities are bright and light. They will shine. And high velocity blood flow, turbulent mosaic pattern will be of different colors. If there is turbulence, you'll get an aquamarine, green, or a yellow color. It localizes valve regurgitations and intracardiac shunts. So here you can see that very clearly. And also remember that motion towards the transducer is displayed above the baseline and motion away from the transducer is displayed below the baseline. Now the basic views, the parasternal long axis view. Always remember you can start clockwise, that is the long axis, the short axis, and the subcostal. But the patient should be comfortable, so start with the position in which the patient is most comfortable because you're treating the patient and not the pathology. So the parasternal long axis view, the patient is in the left lateral decubitus position. You place the transducer at the left sternal edge, third, fourth intercostal space, around 10 o'clock towards the right shoulder. The depth is around 12 to 16 centimeters. The septum should be nearly horizontal so that you can clearly delineate between the right and the left ventricle. So here you can see the left atrium, the left ventricle, the mitral valve in between, the aortic valve, and this is the right ventricular outflow tract in the IVS. So it can assess the size and the function, the motion opening and the calcification. And also here, if there is a large pericardial effusion, you can see that this bright white line is the pericardium that you see here. The short axis view, exactly 90 degrees to the long axis, same position, third, fourth intercostal space, rotated 90 degrees clockwise. And you are just, imagine you're slicing an apple into different sections. That's the short axis view. You can take it at the mitral valvular level, you can take it at the mid-papillary level, and you can assess the chambers, the systolic and diastolic function, the thickening and motion, and also the pericardium. The apical four-chambered view, again the left lateral decubitus position, you keep it near the point of maximum impulse at the 3 o'clock position. And again, you can assess all the things that I previously explained before. It is a very easy view to assess. The subcostal four-chambered view, again, the patient position is supine in this case, 2 to 3 centimeters below the xiphoid process, directed towards the patient's left shoulder, around 3 o'clock. And here you can see the liver, and these are all the ventricles, the IVS, and the mitral valve, right? So left atrium and right atrium are better assessed in this view. Every echo report mentions all these things: systolic function, ejection fraction, ILVH, RVH, regional wall motion abnormality, diastolic function, valvular dysfunction, MR, which is probably ischemic if there is coronary artery disease, ESD, VSD, pulmonary artery pressures, and any clot or vegetations. So what is ejection fraction? The percentage change in the left ventricular volume between systole and diastole is the ejection fraction. Formula we all know: LVEDV minus LVESV, that is the left ventricular end diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume upon end diastolic volume into 100. That is the volume of blood which is being ejected by the ventricle basically. And in the presence of MR, remember, EF is normal despite reduced contractility. This is an important point of the left ventricle, as the left atrium offers less resistance to ejection than the aorta, and after surgery EF decreases. Whereas in aortic stenosis, EF is low despite the normal contractility of the LV, because the LV has to overcome a very high transaortic resistance during ejection, and after surgery it improves. So here we have a video of a normal ejection fraction. You can see that the left ventricle is contracting. It is thickening as it contracts and the walls are moving inwards. This is a beautiful video which is showing you the normal ejection fraction. Now coming on to the next slide. Assessment of left ventricular function, you can see in the plaques view, in the four-chambered view, in the subcostal view, you can assess the left ventricular function. Here you have a minimal change in left ventricular wall thickening and chamber size. So this is severe LV dysfunction. And here it's so thickened that it nearly obliterates it. So this is, again, hyperdynamic LV function. Now when you assess the EF, just look at this video and tell me, this technique is known as eyeballing, where you can just see and gauge. So look at this video and tell me, the ejection fraction is less in which region? Correctly, here it is around 10% because the ventricular walls are not contracting and they're not meeting in the middle at all. Now, right ventricular function, when you assess, remember two things. Firstly, the normal RV size is less than 2/3 of the LV size. So you can see that here, right? But when there is right ventricular hypertrophy, it becomes almost equal. You see this in the plaques view here, that the right ventricle and the left ventricles are almost equal. And also, if the right ventricular size is more than that, then it is with an interventricular septum flattening or a D-shaped LV, then there is significant right ventricular hypertrophy and the right-sided pressures are raised. LVH is also very easy to determine. You can see here in both these views that the left ventricle is particularly thickened, right? It's a very thickened left ventricle and you can measure it as well. Now, diastolic dysfunction, the grades, there can be impaired relaxation, there can be pseudonormalization, restrictive or reversible, and irreversible. I will explain all these, but remember that if a patient comes to you with a left atrium of more than 4 centimeters or LVH more than 15 millimeters, just looking at the report, a bulb should light in your head that this patient might be a patient of diastolic dysfunction. So here, remember, when we talk about diastolic dysfunction, we talk about the transmitral inflow velocity. Before this, you should know, before this, you should know this diagram. And here we are talking about the diastolic and the systolic. Now you see the various phases here. Between the aortic, diastole is the time between the aortic valve closure and the mitral closure. Then you have this isovolemic relaxation time, which is, isovolemic relaxation time, which shows the time between the AV closure and the mitral valve opening. Then there is rapid, early, or passive filling. Finally, there is diastasis here, and in the diastasis, there is no filling. And then there is late LV filling. So remember what is happening. E wave is the passive early diastolic filling. A wave is the active late diastolic filling. And EA ratio is normally more than 1, right? Now, suppose the LA is contracting and blood is going into the left ventricle. So E means the ejection of blood in the left ventricle, maximum filling during diastole, and A is basically the atrial crick, that is the blood that, the gush or the blood that trickles down in the ventricle. So in grade 1 or 2 diastolic dysfunction, E is more, as more blood does not go and atrial crick takes over to maintain the end diastolic volume. So A becomes more than E. So this is grade 1 or 2 diastolic dysfunction when the atrial kick mechanism is taking over and A is more than E because of a stiffened or a thick ventricle. What happens after that is that the LA has to contract so much for the LV to fill that E is huge. E becomes huge because the ventricle is very thick. So E is very large. And now atrial kick has no room to fill the LV because the LV is stiff, it is already distended. Elasticity is gone, it cannot take more blood to distend. So A is less than E. So this is your impaired relaxation. So when myocardial relaxation is impaired, A wave is large and E wave is small, right? As you can see here. And in age more than 50 years, it is less than 0.5. When myocardial distensibility is impaired, then E wave is tall and A wave is small, and this is a restrictive pattern. So I hope you understood this concept of diastolic dysfunction. Every report mentions regional wall motion abnormality. Normokinesia means endocardium moves towards the center of LV during systole. Mild is less than 30. Severe is less than 10%. Akinesia means endocardium does not move or thicken, and dyskinesia means it moves away from the LV. So you see here in the parasternal short, in the parasternal short axis view, you can see that this is the septum. The septum should be on this side, and this is a normal video here. And now in a classic LAD lesion, we will see that what is happening here, that this wall is not moving. So there is a regional wall motion abnormality, and it is in the region of the anterior wall. So there is a left anterior descending artery involved here. So this is how you can qualitatively assess. Now mitral stenosis, we look at the broad echo findings. What do we find in mitral stenosis? Of course, here you can see the stenotic valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So you see the doming of the stenotic valve on the anterior mitral leaflet, right? This is a normal mitral fish mouth valve you see in the short axis view. And you can also see it in the subcostal as well as the apical 4-chambered view. So here, if I try to, now here, look at this video. It's a very nice video where you can see a dilated left atrium. You can see a very severe mitral stenosis. You can see interatrial bulging of the left atrium into the right atrium. This indicates increased left atrial pressure. So this is a good video which is showing mitral stenosis. So to summarize, in MS, you will see all these factors, that if there is any transmitral gradient, coexisting MR, what is the morphology, is there doming, the calcification, the commissural fission, the left atrial size, the pulmonary artery pressures, the ventricular sizes and systolic functions, pulmonary hypertension, any secondary TR. Of course, please look at the aortic valve as well, because in 1/3 of patients of MS, you also have aortic valve involved, and you must do a TE to exclude left atrial thrombus. In MR, what do you get? In mitral regurgitation, in the Doppler view, you get a blue jet of LA in systole, and here it's more better appreciated actually in a video. And calcification of the mitral annulus, you will get LV dysfunction, and diastolic and end systolic volumes are increased. Ejection fraction and shortening rate may decline. You will get a high velocity death in the left atrium. The severity or the width of the chest across the valve, you have to see the size. And in the quantitative methods, you have to see the regurgitant fraction, the volume, the orifice area, because they have a greater accuracy as compared to angiography, and of course the underlying cause, what is causing it. How severe is the MR? You have to see the vena contracta. It is the region in which the blood passes through the valve, the highest velocity. So you see that, and it corresponds to the diameter of the regurgitant orifice area. So if you look at this, this is the vena contracta, this is the jet area, this is the jet length, and this is the flow convergence, the zone of increased velocity before a regional orifice. Imagine water going into a sink. There is increased velocity before the orifice in concentric circles. That is exactly what is flow convergence. So from here you can see, calculate the PISA, the proximal isovelocity surface area, which is a quantitative assessment. So preoperative myocardial contractility, you have to assess that. High incidence of operative death, cardiac failure, postoperative LV function, and you have to see the end systolic pressure volume or stress dimension relationship, right? Because that is a very important indicator of these things. And always remember that LV end systolic diameter that exceeds 40 millimeters is a red flag. Now in aortic stenosis, these are the views you see in the M mode. Here you can see the stenosis. In the continuous wave Doppler, this is the regurgitant jet that you see. Sorry, not the regurgitant jet. This is the continuous wave Doppler. Here you have a stenosed valve, which is very clear. Color flow Doppler. I'm sorry, excuse me. This is the left ventricular outflow tract, and you have to quantify it. It is around 90 millimeters here. So you have to know the cause of AS, the severity of the calcification, directly image the orifice area, calculate the ejection fraction, the aortic root dimensions, is there any mitral valve disease, calculate the jet velocity, and so on. In aortic regurgitation, you have to assess the vena contracta within aortic regurgitation, which is the blue line. I already told you what that is. And then you can see the regurgitant jets. This is the M mode picture, very beautiful picture of aortic regurgitation. So again, M mode measurements you'll have to see the end systolic volume. You'll have to do them serially to time them for surgical intervention. And the Doppler echo and the color flow Doppler are most accurate. You will also have to see the vena contracta here. The grading and the severity is something we all know in MS. Less than 1 is critical. Also, we know pulmonary artery systolic pressure less than 30 is critical. In the same way in aortic stenosis, critical is more than 4. Severe aortic stenosis, and the mean valve gradient more than 40 is critical. This is again another slide which is showing the severity grading in chronic severe primary mitral regurgitation and cardiac regurgitation. So here you should know the regurgitant volume, the fraction, and of course the orifice area. Now I will discuss HOCM. HOCM is long-standing left ventricular or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. This is long-standing left ventricular outflow obstruction with a gradient of more than 30 millimeters. Whenever there is subaortic obstruction, there is true mechanical impedance to LV outflow and increased intraventricular pressures at the level of the proximal left ventricle or the systolic anterior motion of the mitral valve. I will show you a video subsequently. Mitral regurgitation is a secondary consequence. The jet is directed posteriorly, and subaortic gradients and systolic ejection murmurs which are found are dynamic. Diastolic dysfunction is invariably present, and it is very important because it is the cause of sudden cardiac death in young people. So if you see a video of HOCM over here, beautifully you can see the systolic anterior motion of the mitral valve, and you can also see it simultaneously in this video as well. You can see this beautiful systolic anterior motion of the mitral valve, and this is how you diagnose hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. Now remember about the pulmonary artery pressures. Now remember, pulmonary hypertension is very important, right? the resting pulmonary mean pulmonary artery pressure is more than 25, and during exercise it is around 30 millimeters of Hg, and that is perfectly acceptable. But that's perfectly accessible. And mild pulmonary arterial hypertension less than 30 millimeters of Hg, moderate is between 30 to 50, and severe is more than 50. So how do you calculate the pulmonary arterial hypertension? Well, actually what you do is you calculate this by means of the, first of all, you tell me what causes it. Thromboembolism, heart disease, lung disease, increased mortality, gold standard. You will do a right heart catheterization. It is a good estimation of point of care echocardiography. And here first you determine the pressure gradient that exists across the tricuspid valve. So you see that over here. And then the velocity across the tricuspid valve. And then you apply this to the modified Bernoulli's equation, where the P that you add here is the right atrial pressure, which you will calculate by measuring the IVC diameter, right? And this is how you will be able to measure the pulmonary artery pressure by echo. Now remember, the eye does not see what the mind does not know. So if you do not know these things, you will not be able to appreciate them in the patient. And I hope that this lecture will give you a bird's eye view of what you need to see in a patient, and you will be able to astutely diagnose and treat the patient. So let's see the red. So the management is you have to maintain hemodynamic stability and coronary perfusion. Remember the cardiac rate, rhythm, contractility, preload and afterload. Judicious fluid, that's very important. Opioid-based induction, propofol, etomidate, epironium, for relaxation. These are all cardiostable agents. Avoid hypoxemia and acidosis, and use vasopressors when required. So the take-home messages are: left atrial enlargement causes chronic LV diastolic dysfunction. There's a risk of AF. Advanced diastolic dysfunction is intolerant to atrial fibrillation, tachycardia, hypertension, and ischemia, because all these lead to increased left end diastolic pressure. LV hypertrophy per se is not a problem, but when combined with diastolic dysfunction, it is important. You have to differentiate it from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or other myocardial diseases. If you have a patient with a prosthetic valve, give him antibiotic prophylaxis. Excuse me. And pericardial effusion is very important. See whether it is a constrictive or a tamponade physiology, and avoid volume depletion. Monitor blood pressure and heart rate. Pulmonary hypertension, decompensated heart failure. You have to manage the patient well. The management, all of us know. And it's a very high risk for non-cardiac surgery. Right ventricular systolic pressure over 50 in any patient, consider invasive hemodynamic monitoring during and after non-cardiac surgery. Thank you very much for your attention.